Hi, everybody. Welcome to Reimagining Healthcare, a new dialogue with risk and patient safety leaders presented by MedPlace. We're excited to bring you conversations with top risk and patient safety thought leaders from organizations around the country. Please subscribe to get the latest news and content. And if you found value from this episode, please share it with your colleagues. We'd like to see meaningful dialogues created around the community. And if you're interested in participating as a guest, please email us at speakers@medplace.com. I am Jared Bailey. I'm the CEO of MedPlace. I'm playing your host today. But I'm joined by Kara Knowles, the Executive Vice President at Gallagher Bassett Healthcare. Hey, Kara.
Hey, good afternoon.
So let me give a little bit of your background here. So Ms. Knowles holds a Juris Doctorate and has over 18 years of medical malpractice program claims, litigation management experience. In her current role at GB Specialty, Kara is responsible for professional liability and general liability claim management for multiple healthcare systems, including a large multi-hospital risk retention group and a multi-specialty medical group with 1,600 physicians. So I'm sure you see a lot of interesting things through your day. Duties include identification and implementation of litigation strategy, claim reporting to subcommittees, the board of directors, development of claim trends and lessons learned, collaboration with risk managers, defense counsel, excess carriers, and negotiating settlements. That's a lot of stuff that you do. Welcome, Kara. It's good to have you. For those who are unfamiliar, so we're going to talk about the rise of nuclear verdicts today. Okay, it's top of mind for everybody. Everybody's talking about it. We've seen some pretty incredible things happening in the news lately. So, for those who are unfamiliar with the term, can you tell us what a nuclear verdict is?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jared. I appreciate you inviting me to be here today. It's very much a hot topic right now is these nuclear verdicts. And, you went through my background. I kind of have my foot in defense counsel, land, risk management, claims management, and this is a topic that really bridges all three. And at its genesis, nuclear verdicts originally came out of the trucking industry and related to verdicts kind of north of $10 million. And they were an anomaly and things that we really didn't hear about very often. Unfortunately, what we're now seeing is that term, the 10 million, some people still use it, but now we're often talking about 50 million or 100 million.
Yeah.
So really talking about these kind of out there verdicts that kind of shock the industry when they come down. And what's, I think even more interesting right now is we're talking about nuclear verdicts when we really haven't been trying cases. For the past 2 years, jury trials have been null. We just really haven't had them with court closures because of COVID. And so I think everyone's sitting up because our reemergence into jury trials is faced with these nuclear verdicts of increased both frequency and severity.
So they're increasing in frequency. Do we have hypotheses for why that's happening?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a million different reasons why perhaps it's happening. And they all fall under a big umbrella that we're calling social inflation. So it's not that the patient injuries are getting worse or that the cost of providing care for a catastrophically injured patient is different. It's really about the perception of the jurors generally and with regard to litigation. And so kind of drilling down a little bit more on that, what we're hearing in the field is jurors are angry in general. These are folks that are kind of maybe at unease about their own kind of economic or social situation. There's folks that are not happy with kind of corporate America. And so where in the past I would say that verdicts were driven maybe by sympathy, we're kind of seeing a shift where they're being more driven by anger. And I think the other, piece to that is that we're seeing complacency around big numbers. the numbers that are getting thrown out really don't shock us socially anymore. Their numbers, the $100 million verdict is a number that we're hearing about in the news. So we're already becoming kind of desensitized to it. And so when we're in a case and they're asking for that, it doesn't seem as outrageous as perhaps it did 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting, as we're all consumers of healthcare and we're all hearing the headlines, and I do feel the desensitization to it. And then you've got some things like COVID that just threw gasoline on this like fire, right? And it's created this, it feels like, or at least with part of the population, it created this like gulf and all these headlines that are kind of pitting patients against doctors. And it's really unfortunate to see, but you're kind of seeing this cultural shift maybe underneath it. And maybe that's kind of what you're intimating here. Um, and together with these big numbers that do create some desensitization, it's pretty wild. I read that ASHRM, actually the American Society for Healthcare Risk Management, and Aon did a study, right? And they were just looking at these $10 million or higher verdicts. And I read that they've tripled in the last decade. They've gone from 11 in 2010 to 38 in 2019. And that is pretty wild.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of indicates that north of 10 million area is more of a working layer now. Though that's not as uncommon as it
Yeah.
had been. And certainly, we're seeing a change in strategy with how plaintiffs' attorneys are litigating cases, right? The existence of life care plans are just huge. I mean, anytime there's a catastrophic injury, there's going to be a big number of life care plan that really isn't based on reality in terms of what it would cost to pay for these services. But they're already starting at a bigger number. We're seeing kind of a decrease in tort reform being available to lower verdict numbers. And then the subjective nature of pain and suffering, right? That's just a number. There's no benchmark for it. And we're seeing plaintiffs' attorneys really stress and take that number as big as they can, even bigger than these life care plans. So, certainly plaintiffs' firms know how to take all these topics, take the social inflation issues, couple it with a bad damages case, and the jury's willingness to accept the big numbers. So
Interesting.
really interesting.
So the plaintiff side is getting really good at building these big numbers and supporting them and putting those in front of juries. And I just had a guest who's a risk manager, Denise Atwood, and she recognized how well the plaintiff side is organized. And it's not just in one market. It seems in a lot of markets, and it's impressive how well organized the plaintiff side is. And when you start doing a lot of that information sharing and that sort of thing, best practices, you can sort of see a united front that's creating this big impact. I don't know that I see that all the time on the defense side. I don't necessarily see that level of organization and collaboration on the defense side. Probably not even in the same ballpark. So I don't know if you have any opinion on that, but it was a topic that just came up.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're dead on. The plaintiffs' firms are very well organized. They share information better. We are behind the curve with regard to any of that on the defense side. I think we're starting to see a little bit of inroads on that in terms of the use of national trial counsel. So there's, across the country, a dozen, probably more firms that are kind of becoming specialized in taking on these big catastrophic trials. And they're repeatedly going against the same attorneys. So being able to learn from a trial, take even the transcripts, the witness statements, and use them in the next event. So we're starting to get a little traction, but way behind the curve in terms of what the plaintiffs' bar has done with regard to collaboration and sharing.
Yeah, I see it even in the technology side of things. We see some pretty impressive tech companies coming to fore on the plaintiff's side, but you don't see as much, probably not even a fraction of it on the defense side. So it's interesting. It's interesting to watch. There's definitely some bright spots. There's some leaders in the industry that are doing a good job of organizing on the defense side, but it's certainly something I think you're right. Everybody's on their back foot at the moment. So okay, so all the stuff's happening. All of these, nuclear verdicts are starting to be on the rise. Like, what are carriers and self-insured hospitals? You guys are a TPA working with self-insured hospitals and others. Like, what can be done about this? Like, what are people doing about this?
Yeah, and I think, it falls into a couple different buckets. So one is on the litigation front. What can we do? And I think, we A, touched on collaboration. B, I think there has to be a change in mindset with how the defense side presents damages. Historically, there was a thought that if you mention damages, you were somehow de facto conceding liability and causation.
Mm.
You just can't do that anymore. You've got to give the jury an alternative. You've got to be able to give them something else to go off of as they evaluate the damages case, and obviously do it in a way that you're not compromising the liability or the causation side of things. We're seeing a little bit of development of private trials. So using a retired judge or other alternative venue to litigate a case where you're not able to settle it, but without the risk posed by a jury and without the cost or time associated with a jury trial. So I'm hearing kind of ideas of those popping up. And I think people are really trying to maybe get creative about how to litigate these cases. And it sounds a little counterintuitive, or, I think we need to try more cases, which sounds crazy that in the face of nuclear verdicts, I'm suggesting we try more cases. But it looks like we're running scared, right? So that's driving up settlement values. It's driving up kind of venue data. And yes, you have to be smart and selective about those cases that you do take to trial. But I think we've got to get back out there and try to offset the narrative against these nuclear verdicts with some defense verdicts.
Interesting, right? So it's an optics thing, and if all we're reading in the news is wins on one side, yeah, it makes sense. Well, you've got early resolution programs and CRP stuff, and you've got a lot of really great programs, pushing for better communication early on, that sort of thing. Are those exacerbating the problem? Are they helping? Where do those fit in?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, and I think it's highlighting that we need to be proactive before the litigation, before we're at the courthouse steps getting ready to pick a jury. Yeah. I think it starts with, we generally know which of these cases are going to pop, right? It's going to be sexual misconduct cases, sepsis, neurologic injuries to high wage earner adults, or birth injuries. So we know those are our most dangerous subset of cases. So what are we doing at the beginning when those events happen, or certainly when we first get notice of a claim, to get ahead of them? By the time we get a claim letter from a plaintiff's attorney, they've already done about 10 expert reviews. They've had the records reviewed. They have a whole theme. And we don't want to be taking their lead, right? I think we've really got to continue to stress proactive claims management, where from the outset, when you have an event that results in one of those type of injuries, let's get early expert reviews. Let's get staff interviewed. Let's pull policies and procedures. Let's figure out what our story is and not wait for plaintiffs to knock on the door.
It just makes sense, right? Be proactive rather than reactive, and reacting way too late, right after there's already been, bad, poor communication and anger and other resentment and things like that building up over time, confusion, right? Okay, so I don't know what the water cooler conversations sound like over at GB, but we're looking at some things like this, $97 million case that happened to a family with a boy that was injured at birth. You've got this Vanderbilt case. Like, what's the chatter? Like, what's really kind of getting attention right now, and in how how are you like working with your clients to like use these cases to maybe change strategy or implement new things or
For sure. And I think, again, it kind of goes back to the beginning. You know, the best time to settle a case is early and pretty close after you've recognized liability challenges for a couple of reasons. As you just kind of noted, people are less entrenched, people have less time and money into it. Often it's before a plaintiff's counsel has affiliated in another attorney that they're going to have to split fees with. It's before people have spent the next kind of 4 years litigating the case. And, we're also seeing private equity funding these cases on behalf of plaintiff firms.
fascinating.
So, yeah. And so it really gets complicated by the time you get to the jury. And I'm not sure at that point, other than trying the best possible case you can with regard to the Iowa verdict, I'm not sure there's much else you can do at that time. And so, yes, there's going to be those cases where you've done all the right things and you're just told to pound sand about 10 different ways. And so you have no choice and you have to be then ready to try the case. But, I think what we're talking about is how to really get after these cases early, have standard processes in place. With regard to the Vanderbilt one, making sure you know about workarounds in your organization and have you addressed those. Certainly we're hearing with regard to the Vanderbilt one, concern from the hospital systems and from nursing, wanting to know if this is what's ahead for them, which is, unfortunately a tough thing to swallow on top of everything else hospitals and healthcare systems have had to manage in the last few years.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, we have nurses on our staff and we know nurses, and it's just all eyes are on, this particular case because of, the implications for the future. It's tough. It's a really tough time. And, Vanderbilt is, as far as delivery of care is a leader in does some amazing stuff, right? Jerry Hickson and his group down there just, so it can really kind of happen anywhere. But, once it becomes a claim and, bad things happen, that's, sort of the cat's out of the bag at that point. But are you seeing any best practices from hospitals that are, doing things earlier or even before it, before the bad things happen? Have you seen any kind of, interesting things being done at the hospital level, just as far as like quality programs and things like that are innovative?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing, you're exactly right. The best way to avoid a nuclear verdict is don't have the event happen to begin with, right?
Right.
Certainly that's an optimistic theory, but we're hearing more kind of outreach for kind of risk assessments. I think people are concerned about what may be going on that they're not even aware of, and having third parties kind of come in and identify, risk potential and then provide best practices to help with those. I'm certainly seeing those. I don't know about you. Are you seeing other things kind of pop up with regard to the risk management best practices side of things?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're gonna see more of this by virtue of the work that we're doing. But the biggest trend that we see is, I would say historically, many hospitals, maybe it's most, have said, hey, we're not gonna, if something bad happens, we're not gonna go outside of our group and we're not gonna talk about it. We're gonna deal with it internally. And I would say that we've seen a lot more movement towards starting to bring in outside, like doing reviews outside and getting peer review done, not in the same department anymore, but doing a number of peer reviews from folks that have no skin in the game. And, they've got neither competitive nor, partner motivations to cover for anybody, right? It's just, hey, here's just best practices. Here's good medicine. Let's talk about when it's not the best and let's improve that. So I would say that, we're seeing a lot more of that, willingness to go outside of these groups that you just can't get rid of some of that bias. It's just natural. We're all humans, right? We all have to work with everybody, each other all day. And there's only so much I'm going to say or do for or against, somebody that I'm, tied to. So anyway, so I would say that is probably the biggest thing that I see.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of in line with what we're seeing, that it's people are willing to ask for help and a little less defensive, close-in posture with regard to these things. So I do think that that's a good next step.
Yeah. Well, so with your team and with GB in general, what are you guys finding yourselves doing more of these days? Like, what kind of questions are your clients asking, and where are they asking for help specifically? Or is it the same things as usual? Or are you seeing anything new pop up?
Yeah, I think we do a lot of self-insured retention claims administration. And so I think we're seeing these verdicts are causing changes in insurance structures. So hospitals and health systems are having to take on more risk, where the SIR, the self-insured retention, could have been $1 million. Now that's looking at like $5 million. And so, that's a lot more risk for these hospitals to manage on a day-to-day basis, and then certainly manage financially. So I think we're seeing additional opportunities to partner with those folks to help them either develop a claims program or be a partner with them in a claims program. And then I think we're also just seeing people step back and look at their loss runs and their loss histories and say, okay, what can we do with these open cases to try to speed things along? Can we try to resolve some? Can we get them off the books?
Yeah, it's interesting. This certainly is not universal, but there's a few carriers that I know, med mal insurance carriers that know to the day how much, or to the dollar to the day, how much a claim costs to be alive, right? Right. As long as it's alive, it's costing us X number of dollars per day, and it's really interesting. When you start putting it in those kinds of terms, it brings a lot of focus in terms of like, how do we close some of these out? How do we get some of these off the books?
For sure. And I think, the courts are going to start helping in that regard, because we're seeing cases now have viable trial dates again.
Yeah.
And we're seeing ADR, mediations or arbitrations getting ordered by the courts. So they're starting to move things a little bit. There's still certainly a backlog, particularly given the posture of civil cases secondary to criminal cases. But they're helping a little bit as well.
Yeah, I mean, what's the over under on this backlog getting cleared in the next year? I mean, how much are we looking at?
I don't know. I think it also depends. Everybody's holding their breath, hoping that there's not a step backwards, right? Everyone's slowly getting towards business as usual. It is tricky because historically medical malpractice cases take a long time to try. Yeah. Certainly you can do it in 5 days, but because of how many experts are involved, it can be 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And courts don't want to spend 4 weeks of their trial calendar on a single case. They want to try to get those through as fast as possible. And so we are seeing the courts order more settlement conferences, having the parties show up in the courthouse to say, why can't you settle this? They would like nothing more than for us to help them get their docket reduced.
Wow, it sounds like it. I know, or at least I've heard that, as COVID was just starting and then right in the middle of it, that plaintiffs firms were may have been holding back, right? They were holding back. They felt like, our physicians and our nurses, the front line, were like, they're all, they had a halo effect around them, because they were saving our lives, right? And they were in the trench, And I heard a lot of, plaintiffs' firms were holding back on cases. I don't know if that's true, and I don't know if we've seen some of that holding back now start to release now that, we've been through COVID a couple of times. Have you seen anything like that? Is there any trend one way or the other
Yeah.
to point at?
Yeah, I think we were really hoping on that halo effect, that these healthcare heroes, now that they're sitting in a jury trial, you're not going to want to punish them.
Right.
We haven't quite seen that play out. We have to some degree when we're talking about trials of the local nonprofit community hospital where everybody on the jury goes and gets their care. For bigger systems, we're not really seeing it. And unfortunately, what we have also seen is some increased skepticism around medical evidence. People aren't just accepting what the medical expert has to say at face value. They have their own ideas about the medicine or science. There's a little bit more distrust on the various theories, perhaps, particularly if it's not a mainstream idea that your expert is speaking to. So juries are a lot more skeptical. For me at least, that was a surprise as we've gone back into the jury trial system.
Yeah, indeed. Well, so I guess with all of these nuclear verdicts that keep coming faster and a little bit bigger, it sounds like, some of the advice that you guys are spending with your customers, just looking at their risk stack and making sure that is keeping up with the trends, right? I mean, you can go years and not have one problem, and then one of these nuclear verdicts hits, and all of a sudden you're like, well, we didn't engineer our capital stack or our risk stack to accommodate something like this. Anything else that you guys are doing as far as trends, or is it just keep getting better at defending and keep making better decisions early on?
I think it's also being sensitive to the timeline, right? A case that has a verdict hit today in 22, that could be care from back in 2014 or 2015. And not that you should discount that, but I think you should also retrospectively look back and say, okay, what was happening in our organization at that time? Is it different leadership, a different culture? Have we made changes, hopefully, in those 5 years? And then also, what can we continue to learn? Because we are going to, there's always going to be, especially in med-mal, a 5-year lag, sometimes even more, based on when the event happens to when you're getting that verdict. So I think it's understanding that timeline and looking for opportunities throughout the entirety of the timeline.
Yeah. Yeah, I've also noticed, I would say this is another trend. I would say that in a lot of hospitals historically, that, the risk group has sort of been separated from the quality and patient safety group, and not enough data transferring between the two. And I would say that seems to be eroding. That, for places, in some places, that's a very integrated process, and it's really fantastic to see it. But in others, I see where they've been historically separated. I see that gulf closing, and I see data being shared back and forth in a little bit more helpful way, right? As far as, claim may happen historically, it goes to the risk group and you never hear about it again. But then I'm seeing now the trend is, claim happened, but then what kind of learnings can happen throughout that feed back into the delivery of care and the quality systems.
No, I think that's a great point. I think claims, risk, quality were almost 3 separate silos, and we are starting to see them working more collaboratively because everyone's got the same goal, right, which is patient safety. And so really trying to, great point, increase kind of the sharing among those different departments.
Hey, one thing I didn't think to ask you, but I'll ask you since I've got you. Is there anything happening from a laws that are being proposed or new laws on the books that are, raising any eyebrows, or either, creating some concern, or, like concern that this may become a trend, or hope that this could become a trend? Like anything happening from a
Yeah, I think from a legal standpoint, the big unknown is the COVID immunities and how that's going to play out in the future through the PrEP Act. There's different decisions starting to come down on, when a patient event injuries happened during the thick of COVID, what immunities might exist and how do those play out. And so we're really early on with regard to those cases. But I think that's going to be fascinating to watch how that comes out, because it isn't just a COVID patient who had an injury because of COVID. It's a patient that was treated during the pandemic that maybe there was staffing shortages or equipment shortages or an inability to treat. I mean, there's so many ways that can be interpreted. So that's going to be pretty interesting to watch.
Yeah, like how porous are those those walls that we were all counting on, going into COVID,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Right. And I think, so we'll continue to watch that. I think we'll watch tort reform. I know that there's some, even in Iowa, some current legislation about caps. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in this legislative session in the face of that recent verdict. And then I think the other kind of hot topic legally is, and this is pretty specific, but evidentiary rules around damages. So typically you're not allowed to introduce evidence about insurance or payment, third-party costs for things. And that, I think, has caused these large life care claims. And so I know people are trying to figure out, is there a way to get a better judicial opinions or judicial reform or evidentiary opinions to change how damage evidence can be put on to be more in line and realistic with what happens out in the real world.
That's super interesting. I don't know if you followed it. I thought I saw Utah was either passed or is close to passing something around candor laws. Did you see that? I don't know if you track what's happening in Utah.
No, I haven't seen it. I wouldn't be surprised. I think we're starting to see more candor laws, which I think is great for early resolution and discussion. Was it getting traction in Utah? What you were?
It looked like it from what I read. This conversation sparked it, and I know that Colorado, where you're at, has adopted candor laws, and that's had a big impact.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and we're starting to see attorneys here in the Denver area really focus in on kind of candor cases and helping advise hospital systems on how to manage candor cases. So always an opportunity for lawyers to find new ways to get work.
Right. I feel confident that our lawyers will always find a way to make money and stay afloat. Well, Kara, this has been great. It's always good to see you and talk to you. Do you have any parting advice for any of us, or you don't have to? And then also, how do people find you?
Sure. I don't have any great parting advice. We're all in this together, so perhaps that's what I can offer. And then certainly I'm always happy to answer questions or help folks, through LinkedIn. I'm on there, or my email is Kara_Knowles@gbtpa.com. So always happy to help folks talk through scenarios, as I think we all learn from that as well.
Well, you've been a tremendous help to me, a good advisor in person for me to lean on. So I appreciate you there. And yeah, thanks so much for joining us. We'll put some ways to get a hold of Kara in the show notes if you guys are looking for that. And in the meantime, thanks again for joining. And
thank you for having me. It's always great to see you and catch up.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Again, this is the Reimagining Healthcare podcast, the new dialogue with risk and patient safety leaders. Subscribe and share if you found this episode helpful. And if you'd like to participate again as a guest, reach out. You can get a hold of us at speakers@medplace.com. And that's it. Thanks again, Kara. Good to see you. And thanks everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.